Okay. Should be working. Thank you all for coming. We are so happy that Dr. Kristen Vogel Campbell could grace us with her presence today and share her deep understanding of special education and especially supporting culturally and linguistically diverse families, which is a major theme of ours this semester. She's got over 20 years experience in the field of special education and currently works out of a district in Northern California, right? San Mateo, is that correct? Awesome. And I
Yeah.
know you're going to be introducing yourself too, so I'll let them hear it right from you. But she has, as I've shown you in class, her book just came out, Partnering with Culturally and Linguistic Diverse Families in Special Education. And so we are really excited to have you with us today. If it's okay, Dr. Vogel Campbell, I'll have you just introduce yourself and then maybe quickly we could whip around and everybody could share like their name and what they're studying or their experience. Does that sound okay? Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I am Kristen Vogel Campbell. I utilize she, her pronouns. Right now, I am the coordinator for the San Mateo Foster City School District in Northern California. We're about 20 miles south of San Francisco. So, Silicon Valley, I'm sure you've heard of that. Yeah, and as your instructor had said, I have been in special education for about 20 years, ranging from para educator to director of special education for 1 year. And right now I am the coordinator of special education. I did put a please do not disturb sign on my cubicle, but please excuse if folks are coming around and walking about. It is about 2 p.m. Or 2:15 in Pacific time, so we are still during school hours. But I'm really glad to be here with all of you to talk about such an important topic. So yeah, I would love to kind of get an idea of where you are in your education journey, and then if you're currently student teaching or if you are a teacher of record, like what grade level of students that you're working with, what kind of families, and then just if you are in a urban or suburban or rural district. And you can put that in the chat, or please feel free to unmute, whichever mode works best for you.
We'd like to start us off. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Sorry, I'm also talking a little quietly because I'm in the library. So hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am a fifth-year grad student studying special education, and last year I graduated with my degree in early childhood and English. So currently I'm not teaching, but in my past placements, I was in mostly suburban settings with one rural setting last semester. So it was a little bit of a mix.
Go ahead, Olivia. Thank you.
Okay, I didn't want to cut off Bella if she was going. I'm Olivia. I'm a senior in the early childhood special ed program. I'm currently teaching in a kindergarten class in which we have one student whose family came from Brazil and speaks only Portuguese, and we have one little boy whose family speaks Spanish, although he does speak and learn in English right now fully in the classroom. Yeah.
I'm Isabella. I'm also in the early childhood 5-year special ed program. Just like Olivia, I'm in my senior year, and currently I am student teaching in an urban school. And I'm placed in a first grade general ed classroom, and then most of us here will do our special ed placement next semester.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Spencer. I'm not student teaching this semester, but I work in a preschool, and a lot of my kids are like Indian, so I learned a lot about their culture, which is really cool, and like South Asian. And now I'm studying special education and history.
Hi, my name is Daisa. I am in my fourth year special ed in English. Right now in my placement, I'm in a pre-K classroom, and most of the students only speak Spanish, and most of their parents only speak Spanish also.
Hi, I'm Corinne. I'm a senior and I'm in the 5-year master program for early childhood special ed. And I'm not student teaching right now, and I haven't, but I have been in practicum placements, which are mostly suburban areas. And I am also doing Special Olympics coaching, so I get to at least see a different population somewhere that's not in a school placement right now.
Amanda, I saw that you had your hand up. I don't know if you wanted to go next.
Yeah, I can go really quick. My name is Amanda. I'm also in the 5-year special ed early childhood program. I'm currently in a second grade classroom, and I would say it's pretty suburban.
I'm Lynn. I'm in my graduate year of the 5-year early childhood special ed program. And I've been in mostly suburban placements, and I'm not sure where I'll be next semester.
Brianna, would you like to go?
Yeah, can you hear me? I keep freezing on like my end and you guys keep freezing too. Is it fine?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. I'm Rihanna. I'm a senior in the early childhood and special ed 5-year program. I also studied women, gender, and sexuality studies as my second major. And I am currently teaching in a first grade classroom. Pretty diverse as far as the makeup of their backgrounds, but all English speaking, and in a
Jennifer and then Jordan, and I think that would be everybody.
Yeah, I'm Jennifer. I'm in the 5-year early childhood special ed and psychology program. I'm in my 4th year doing my first clinical, and I'm in Trenton, so urban setting in a 3rd grade classroom.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm also in the 5th-year program. I am a senior and I'm student teaching right now in a kindergarten classroom. It's right next to TCNJ, so Ewing urban area. They're pretty diverse. I just have one student that speaks Russian, so she's an ESL.
I think that is everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to just share a little bit about yourself.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Make sure I'm sharing the right tab. And then let me go ahead and share here. And scroll and hide the floating panel because that is always super distracting. All right. So yeah, again, this is week 15 of your class. I had a chance to review your syllabi. And then just a little bit about me. I've already introduced myself. So I'm originally from New York, in New York City, and I did my undergrad at Hunter College, City University of New York. I did not major in education. I actually majored in cultural anthropology. And then for me, the road to special education was very personal. So when I was a senior in college, my nephew was diagnosed as autistic, and seeing the challenges, but also the rewards that having him assessed and then start special education services, that really kind of helped me make a career change. And ultimately, I went back to school for my master's at NYU in early childhood special education, which in the state of New York is birth through 3rd grade, and then moved out to California shortly afterwards. When I moved to California, I needed to do most of my credentialing work all over again because of just the intricacies of classes not lining up. And in California, early childhood special education is only through preschool. So they saw that I had an early childhood credential and they're like, okay, great, you can teach preschool. And that's not necessarily what I wanted to do. I initially wanted to be a second or third grade teacher. Um, through my teaching experience, I learned that I was actually more of a middle school person. So after teaching K-5 for a number of years, moved into middle school as kind of like a resource room teacher. And then from there, after I earned my administrative credential, I've been a district administrator for the past 8 years. So yeah, I always just like to position myself and kind of the why of my journey in special education. And yeah, so we can go ahead and get started. All right, so hopefully by the end of this session, we will talk a little bit about how there are barriers that prevent parents and families or caregivers from full participation in the IEP process. And we'll also talk about envisioning plans, how we co-imagine planning with families through partnership and dialogue. And we'll look a little bit into one of the scenarios from my book. And then finally, we will take time to, I'll answer some of the questions that I received before the session. And so we'll go through some of those. And as more questions come up, we'll go through those. So I will put a link in the chat after we have kind of finished with the slideshow. I've put a resource folder together with a lot of the forms that we have talked about today. And let me see if I can actually. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat for you. And those are, that will link to that resource folder. And then back into the slideshow. Perfect. So yeah, so there's lots of resources in here. Definitely, it might be a little bit overwhelming, but take what you need. And if something is not applicable to you, absolutely don't worry about it. So I really love this quote from Bell Hooks. She was a Black critical feminist and educator. And one of her books, Teaching to Transgress, is just a really amazing resource for educators at any part in their journey. So to engage in dialogue is one of the simplest ways we can begin as teachers, scholars, and critical thinkers to cross boundaries, the barriers that may or may not be erected by race, gender, class, professional standing, and a host of other differences. So I think this really just puts into a finite number of words some of the things that we encounter as teachers when working with families that come from different backgrounds and unintentionally, the ways that we practice might be in conflict with the cultural values that parents and families hold. So learning and then reflecting and then changing our practice. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of go into a little bit about just the history of reactions to disability in the United States. Since the colonization of the land that we know as the United States, there has been a marked stigma of the other. The American ideals of independence, autonomy, and freedom clashed with the perceptions of those with disabilities who were seen as deficient and dependent. And so, I'm going to be using, a lot of this is through deficit-based language, which is not how we want to frame working with students and families now. So there is a book called The Ugly Laws that were passed in many states and cities across the United States in the 19th and 20th century. And, just as an example, San Francisco passed a law in 1867 that banned diseased and deformed persons who were deemed unsightly from any public space in the city. And so this attempt at removing persons with disabilities from the public eye perpetuated the notion that those with a mental or physical impairment were not meant to be seen nor heard. So access to education for those with disabilities was heavily influenced by race, by gender, social status. And as a result, most of those considered disabled were denied any type of formal education. Laurent Claire and Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet founded the American Asylum for the Deaf, which was the first disability-centered institution in Hartford, Connecticut in 1817. And the Gallaudet family was also instrumental in the founding and recognition of the National Deaf Mute College, later renamed Gallaudet University in 1864, and that's in Washington, D.C. So that's a photo of the American Asylum for the Deaf. And there is a photo of Gallaudet University. All right. So public schooling in the United States was not designed to meet the needs of a diverse range of learners. In fact, until recently, only 50 years ago next year, students with disabilities were often excluded from the system entirely. So Nielsen, who is an educational scholar, stated that disability as a concept was used to justify legally established inequalities. So this is a little bit of special education law. So before the passing of PL 94-142, or the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, public schools in the United States were not obligated to provide education to children with disabilities. Only about 20% of children identified with a disability attended public schools in 1970. Some states had laws that explicitly excluded children with specific disabilities from receiving education at their local public school, including students who were blind, deaf, emotionally disturbed, or had cognitive impairments. And the majority of those students were sent to state specialized schools or were institutionalized. And families were encouraged by doctors at these institutions to never mention these children in order to preserve the sanctity of marriage and other children in the family. So there are families that, their family history, and there are family members that are missing from their family history because they were sent off to institutions because they were disabled, and the medical community encouraged families to just forget about these family members, which is really tragic. So the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, or EAHCA, changed things drastically. It stated that public schools were obligated to assess suspected students suspected with a disability, and guaranteed that special education services were available to students who needed them in the form of an IEP, or individualized education plan. The law also required school districts to provide a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. So we love our acronyms in special education, in the least restrictive environment, LRE, with maximum opportunities to interact with their peers who did not have disabilities. Assigning students with disabilities to separate schools was only deemed appropriate when goals and services established to make progress could not be achieved in the general ed classroom or in a separate setting at the public school. So finally, the law developed oversight, which is the most important part, for special ed services to ensure consistency and accountability to the students that they served. And most importantly, provided federal funds for programs with students with disabilities. So shockingly, but also not shockingly, since 1975, the funding that has been determined as appropriate by the federal government has never been fully never been fully promised. We've never received full funding for special ed services at the federal level. So in 1990, that law was changed to what we know now as IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it went deeper into defining student and parent rights, focused more on inclusive services, practices for students with disabilities, and the development of procedural safeguards, which is a really important portion of the IEP meeting. And there have been further reauthorizations in 1997, 2004, and 2015. And in 2015, students with disabilities are held to standards equivalent to their general ed peers. And parameters for statewide testing for students with disabilities were reworded and expanded to allow states to develop alternative assessments for students who have more significant disabilities. And it also put protections into the law about bullying of students with disabilities. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about theoretical frameworks that guide the work that I do, both as a practitioner in the field as well as a researcher. And so community cultural wealth, which was developed by Tara Yasso at the University of California at Riverside, includes 6 types of capital that educational leaders and teachers may use to frame their interactions with students. This may be particularly useful to educators committed to increasing the number of students who remain in the pre-K through 20 academic pipeline. And the 6 forms of cultural capital are aspirational, linguistic, familial, social, navigational, and resistant. And then I believe, did any of you have a chance to read the Yasso article, Whose Culture Has Capital?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can show my video panel. That is okay. It's in the resource folder. So I would say absolutely take a look at it when you get a chance. It is super informative to just kind of bettering your practice. So the cultural wealth model is a framework that understands how all students, but it was initially framed to support students of color in college, but we can use it from early childhood all the way up until college. And how student assets that students bring to school are often ignored or disregarded by the school systems. So I would absolutely encourage you to read it when you get a chance. It's a super interesting article. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about disability studies in education, which is another theoretical framework. And it situates disability within social and political context and is concerned with the civil and human rights of students with disabilities, including issues of equity, of access, and inclusion across all educational settings, curriculum, and activities. So I remember one of you had mentioned the Special Olympics. Like, that's definitely one of those asset-based activities that we'd love to have our students participate in. And then finally, another theoretical framework is DISCRIT, so Disability Critical Studies, focuses on the way that the forces of racism and ableism are interconnected, and they are often invisible in the systems that we work in to uphold notions of normality. So when we talk about when we say regular students or normal students or typical students, we're situating our students with disabilities as abnormal or irregular or atypical. And that is defeatist deficit language that we need to kind of disrupt to recognize their humanity. And just how everything is connected. So class, race, gender, disability, how it's all connected, and how person's multiple identities can have an impact on their lives and how they experience life. And then finally, a little bit more about disability justice. So pictured here are some of the most prominent perspectives in the disability justice movement. So Alice Wong is the female in the leopard sweater. Leroy Moore is the black and white photo of a black man putting his hand to his face. And then we have our disability ancestors. So Judy Human is the woman with the glasses with the colorful scarf. Audre Lorde is the black and white photo of the black woman with the afro with a scarf. And then Stacey Park Milburn is pictured in the photo of an Asian American woman in a wheelchair, as well as Sins Invalid, which is an arts-based disability advocacy organization. All right, so let's get to the meat of it. So there are three major barriers to parental engagement and partnership: logistics, communication, and mindset. And we have let me pull this up. All right, so here are all of, this is a breakdown of the three of these barriers. So we think about logistics. Documents presented to parents before meetings. Do parents have a say when a meeting is scheduled? Do parents have a say in how they participate in the meeting? If it's in person, if they participate through Zoom, if they participate by phone? Is the meeting space comfortable and set up in a way that everyone can look at each other around the room? Or is the meeting space cramped so that parents have to kind of lean over, they're not able to see everybody? And the same with communication. Is there, are school teams proactively addressing issues, or are we always reactive? Are we speaking with families, or are we speaking to families? Are we rushing through our reports, or are we stopping and pausing and allowing time for questions? Do we utilize interpretation in our meetings? And do those interpreters have knowledge of the language needed in order to translate appropriately for families? And then finally, mindset. Are we pronouncing parent names correctly? Are we utilizing pronouns? Are we assuming that parents have knowledge of their child? Are we using the positive assets-based language? Or are we talking about how students can't do something or they won't do something? So these are just some of the examples of that. And in order for me to also remember to do this, to stop and pause and ask questions, if at any point you have a question, please put it in the chat and I will stop and answer it, or we can save that until later on. But it's a lot of content and I want to make sure that we're going at a pace that's meaningful for you all. All right. And then I've also linked the work of Ari Gerzon Kessler, who is the coordinator of family engagement in the Boulder, Colorado schools. And he has an amazing book that is a great resource for teachers as well as for site administrators on developing effective family partnerships. All right. So when I talk about humanizing the IEP process, it means that we need to go beyond what we need to complete on the paperwork. So we can check a box and we can complete that and send it in, and the state will look at it and go, okay, we had Maria's IEP, everything was done on time, and that's good. But at the end of the day, are we ensuring that the IEP is a safe and supportive process for families to share and to state their opinion and their voice, and that where they feel that their perspective is honored and respected. So, we IEP teams and just school teams in general, there it can be done. Like, we can have a compliant IEP with while disregarding parent voice. And at the end of the day, it might look legally compliant on paper, but it's not what we are tasked to do as educators. And yeah, moving towards redefining and expanding what is considered legitimate knowledge, not centering the knowledge of the experts in the room and the professionals, but making sure that family knowledge is honored as well, and disrupting white male cis heteronormativity, which is a very long word and a lot to say. All right, so let me go back here. So what we're going to do now is this is a vignette from I believe chapter 5 in my book. And I'm wondering if someone would be willing to read this out loud. I'm a little tired of hearing my own voice. So is there someone available to read this out loud? Let me see the video panel. Maybe not Elizabeth, since she's in the library, but if someone is in a more private place, if they're able to share this out. Yeah, go for it. Thank you.
Okay. We're just immigrants here. We don't know the system. As Jeremy transitions to kindergarten, he begins to exhibit some challenging behaviors in school. He begins receiving applied behavior analysis, ABA, therapy at home, and Gloria and Tony ask for behavioral interventions to create consistency across the homeschool setting. In passing, the school psychologist mentions a classroom on a district campus that serves students on the autism spectrum with embedded ABA strategies and a lower student-to-teacher ratio that may be an option for Jeremy. Tony perceives this conversation as an invitation to go visit the classroom in anticipation of his son changing classrooms. The day after he goes to visit, he recalls receiving a scathing email from the school psychologist and the director of special education stating that Tony is not permitted to observe the classroom further and that the district will not be recommending a change of placement for Jeremy. Tony expounds on the incident further when he states, "Whatever the authority will tell us, we will just follow, and that's one thing that sometimes, and and we're not very vocal. We don't know how the system works because we're immigrants, basically."
All right. Thank you. So let me put the link to the Jamboard in the chat. And you all will have edit access to this. So feel free to answer the question in the Jamboard, or feel free to just, jot down your initial thoughts. So we'll take about 5 minutes or so for this activity, and let me just see, like, as folks pop in. So yeah, again, just thinking about, like, what are your initial thoughts and reactions? Or you can answer, how does this situation provide us an example of how schools decenter familial knowledge? And I believe you all should have edit access to the Jamboard. Are you able to get into the Jamboard? So for those of you like not familiar with how to use it, if you scroll to the um, uh, if you scroll on the left-hand side, there's the sticky note, and then you add a sticky note here, and then you can just put your thoughts down. I see someone has the ability to do this. Great. I'm loving these responses. Yeah, I think the school psychologist and admin should have connected the parents with the other schools or set a meeting time to see what the parents needed. Yeah. Schools often assume parents and families are aware of everything that is going on with the child, so they feel less of a need to explain the information more in depth. Not seeing the need to be fully transparent and how it harms families and their relationship with schools. Another one, full information details. They may not know what something means. One of my favorite statements is, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't know, how are you going to be able to answer a question about it or ask a question? Schools are not getting the full time and clear information. Yeah, limiting the family's part in the process and their knowledge. And yep, I'm seeing like jargon. Yeah, lots of jargon, the alphabet soup of special ed. Was there anyone that wanted to kind of unmute and share just their initial kind of reaction to that situation, or have you encountered a similar situation in some of your like student teaching, or if you're the classroom of record? Elizabeth, of course, if you want to type, you can type. You don't need to go off of mute.
I actually was just typing in the chat because my like service is horrible, so I've been hearing like parts of things. So I was just going to
okay.
I was just gonna type like if I'm if I cut out, that's why.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
Why don't we also just start closed captioning as well? So hopefully that's a little bit better for you. And
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
yeah, the recording will be available for you later on.
Mhm.
And yeah, I apologize that
I don't know why,
you're
because
having some connectivity issue.
I'm in the library, so it should be perfect, but who knows?
You would think, right? Yeah, so I mean, just this is just one situation in my career in special education. And it happens all the time. And I think language barriers and communication barriers, parents who speak a language other than English are more prone to having these, disconnect issues with teachers and schools and principals. And, by using jargon, even saying IEP, not explaining like what an IEP is, especially for our littles in our early childhood when students are just becoming eligible for special education services. Those meetings should be the longest because every single thing needs to be explained in very, very explicit detail. And when I see meetings on a calendar that are scheduled for a half hour, especially meetings where there's a translator involved, it's really shocking to me because we can't get anything done in a half hour. So when I see that, when I'm invited to a meeting, I will ask the team, I'm like, do we need to schedule more time? And I know that that's inconvenient for us as a school staff for multiple amounts of reasons. Principals need to find subs for teachers, both the general ed teacher and the special education teacher. If there are speech and language or occupational therapy folks involved, sometimes they need to cancel or move around sessions, but we owe it to our families. Families are guaranteed one IEP meeting a year. And if they know their rights, they can request an IEP meeting. But we're so used to having, sometimes 3 or sometimes 4 meetings in a day, but it's just another meeting for us. But for some of our families, this is the only meeting that they get. So we need to be really cognizant of that fact. So let me go back to the, and yeah, just thank you so much for, all of the sticky notes. And just, this is one of those situations that, I go back to and I think about, what could we have done better? What could the school psych and the director of special education said to this family and maybe worded it in a different way? Hey, if you'd like to go see a classroom, please let us know so that we can accompany you. We want to make sure that the classroom, the students aren't out at PE, that there's not another observation being scheduled, that the teacher is scheduled to be in the classroom. That would have made a whole lot of difference. But they, addressed it in a way that made the parents lose their trust in the system. And trust, earning trust back after trust is broken is really, really difficult. And that happened, I think, when the student was in 2nd or 3rd grade. And he's now a 10th grader. And it took a good number of years for the family to be able to have faith that the school was doing what was best for their son. So we need to be proactive in our approaches. All right, and let me go back to share my screen and go back to the slide deck. So now I'm going to talk about some of the questions that were submitted to me before the session, and hopefully I can answer some of them for you. And then how much more time do we have allocated for this? I just wanted to make sure I'm not running too long.
Well, we can keep them till 7 p.m.
Okay. Well, all right.
But that is up to you. I don't think that you were prepared to stay with us that long.
No, but I want to make sure that I do these questions justice and then
Thank you so much.
leave and then leave time for any other questions that come up.
Yes. And if may I just say one thing? This was these questions that I sent to Dr. Vogel Campbell were questions that you had added to a reading response that we did for homework one time. So that's how I just sent them to her anonymously though, just so you know.
Yes, I don't know who asked any of them, but honestly, these are all really logical questions and they all make sense. And, some of them I don't have a complete answer for because there's still questions that I have. But yeah, none of these were completely out of left field. Have you ever written an IEP or sat in an IEP meeting with parents and administrators? What was the dynamic? Yeah, I can't count the number of IEPs that I've sat in over my career, but every IEP is different. And I think if the school-based members of the team, you know, I always think about like as setting like a dinner table. So making sure that everyone has enough seats, making sure that there are enough plates for everyone who's coming to the table, making sure that the silverware is, set up in the proper order, making sure that there's enough napkins. So things like that. If that dinner table is set up for the number of people that you have coming to your dinner party, it's going to be a much easier dinner party. If you have set up for 4 and 15 people show up, there's going to be problems. So it's the pre-planning of the meeting. And a lot of it has to do with the physical space, but it also has to do with making sure that, draft documents are sent home in advance. And if at all possible, that those are translated into the home language of the family. That, the case manager and folks that provide services to their student call the family before the meeting and ask them, hey, do you have any like burning questions that you'd like us to answer during the meeting? Or, what are your aspirations for your child? What would you like to get out of this meeting? So that we're prepared to address the specific needs of the family in the meeting. So I've had meetings that have been wonderful and amazing. And I've had meetings that have gone south for a variety of reasons. So I think it's just, it goes back to, again, that careful planning and making sure that you have a positive relationship with the family going in. Yeah, and not every IEP is going to go well, but I think it is very, very, the relationship that you have with the family is a direct correlation to the outcomes of the meeting. And sometimes you have to adjourn and you have to meet again for a part 2. I would say that an hour and a half is kind of the maximum that anybody has capacity for meeting. There have been times where I've been in an IEP meeting for 2 hours and I'm just like, all right, guys, like we need to stop because everyone's eyes are glazing over and we need to, talk about what we've already accomplished and that what we need to accomplish at that next meeting. So yeah, it really does vary. What types of assistive technology have you used that may not be included in an IEP or IFSP, but help students with and without disabilities? So in your resource guide and the resource folder, this slide deck is linked there. I did come up with a assistive technology list, not exhaustive, of course, that includes no tech, low tech, and high tech. So yeah, these are just a variety of things that have been really, really helpful in helping students meet their IEP goals who might need some of that assistive technology. And yeah, again, like this is not like the be all end all list. We often see parents fight for their children to be moved to inclusion rooms, which is what everyone usually wants for the child. But what would you do if a family is hesitant or scared to move their child out of isolated rooms? And this is a really good question. And I think the number one piece is whenever we talk about student placement, and we are proposing a different physical space, we should offer the parents an opportunity to see that space because their idea of what a mainstream room or an inclusion room or a general education room, their perception might be drastically different from reality. So letting them get a chance to see what that classroom looks like and, if at all possible, having them have an opportunity to chat with either the teacher or the school psychologist so that they have a informed understanding of what it is. And yeah, I think, feelings of hesitancy or fear are absolutely valid. And validating parent feelings is really, really helpful and powerful. So I think it's just, yeah, I completely understand that this is a huge change. But based on the progress and goals that we're seeing, based on, the student asking for or wanting to be more social and engaging in those social interactions, um, making sure that we have the evidence to demonstrate that the student is ready to go. Here's a question that I wish I had the answer for. Why is the referral process so daunting? Let me take a drink of ginger ale. I wish the referral process was not as daunting as it is. It is pretty complicated. Here in California, for a parent to navigate requesting support for their child, they need to, make a written or verbal request. And then there are specific timelines that the district or the school needs to respond. If it's a referral that is done internally from like a school staff member, it's also really difficult. And I think part of that is we want to make sure that students receive the support that they can in the least restrictive environment. And there are accommodations that can be made in general education. And I think that that is the spirit of why there are so many steps to a referral. Sometimes it is because special education services are really expensive. So if you are the teacher of record for a child that is obviously demonstrating some difficulty, part of our job as teachers and educators is also to be advocates for our students. So, asking the questions, uh, seeing what type of supports are available in your general ed classroom. Sorry. And then, trying those out, trialing them, seeing if there's any progress made with those changes. And if not, then, moving forward with, in California, we have what's called an SST or a student study team or student success team before we necessarily jump to referral for special education. So it's protections, but we also need to make sure that we're advocating for our kids. How do you support with special education? How can you support with special education related services needs if they don't have those supports at home? This is a really difficult thing. And, when our students walk out the door at 3 o'clock or 3:15, working in partnership with families is essential. And some schools have community service workers that should be aware of various supports in the community. If it's if they're food insecure, connecting them to local food banks. If it's childcare, connecting them to like the local YMCA or Police Athletic League for after school programming. If it's mental health supports, if there are local agencies that can provide, you know, family or student counseling outside of the school day, which is outside of the IEP. Yeah, just being aware of the community supports. So if you are not a member of the community in the school that you teach, it's kind of getting to know those things. I know that some principals and secretaries in the school office will have a folder of resources. So just become aware of those pieces, and you can, refer your families out. Let me go back here. All right. Oh, I kind of just answered that question. If they don't have a strong support system or resources at home, and how can schools ensure that parents and families can receive resources at home? So I think, again, I think it's just connecting them to those community resources and, just following up as needed, within the realm of bandwidth that you have as the teacher. If there are workers at the school or district level that specialize in that, make sure that they're aware of those the particular students and families. How do I try and communicate with a family who has had a negative experience with their previous teacher? This is a really good question, and it's, I think it's absolutely relevant. It starts out from the beginning of the year. It's we need to earn their trust back, and starting out with a welcome letter at the beginning of the year, communicating home when great things happen, as opposed to just when the student had a rough day or a challenging day. Kind of reframing the narrative of what the teacher's communication is. So, and sometimes it goes back to parents thinking about the negative experience that they had in school. Some of our students who have IEPs, some of their family members also had IEPs. I've worked with lots of moms who were hesitant to sign an IEP because they were in special education when they were a child and they had a lot of difficulty and they didn't like it. So it's, again, earning trust back and just doing a lot of repair work. So I think it's being consistent, saying when you're going to communicate, following up and communicating, and just remaining as positive as possible and affirming, and also seeking out support from your administrator if the communication might go sideways, or if you are receiving like overly critical or negative emails from families. And hopefully that doesn't happen, but it inevitably does at some point for every educator. And I think it is understanding that it's not necessarily you, that it is because of a negative experience from the past. How do I try and communicate with a family who does not want to communicate back or seems uninterested in their child's education? I would actually reframe this question because this question has a lot of assumptions that a family may not necessarily not want to communicate or seem uninterested, but the means of communication that we employ might not be accessible for them. So a family who doesn't speak English, if we are calling and speaking English or emailing and speaking English or sending things home in English and we don't get a response, it might appear as if they're uninterested, but they are unable to do so. So I think it's getting the use of an interpreter from your school side or the district and reaching out to the family. And I would say, if you are making every valid, culturally relevant attempt to communicate with a family, that is a good time to kind of pass the baton and see if the school site wants to reach out. See if, your administrator wants to reach out. Maybe it's the time of day. Maybe if you're communicating right at the end of the school day, some families have non-traditional working hours. So I think it's being open and being flexible, and also realizing that it's not just you that is responsible for communication. And then how do I communicate with a parent where our ideas for the child are not aligning? Similar to the last question, I think it's worth going back and maybe reading notes from the IEP meetings in the past and kind of seeing like where this may have started. And then also just reaching out to the family and asking them like, what are your hopes and aspirations for your student? And I think making sure that, parents understand that at the end of the day, you are there for their child and want to be supportive. Um, if there is a huge misalignment in understanding and goals, if you are in special education, some districts have program specialists or teachers on special assignment that can also come in to help support you and to facilitate a meeting and to really use some alternative dispute resolution strategies into coming to mutual agreement. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to, agree on goals and services so that we can move forward. As a future special educator, what can be one way to help families not feel overwhelmed by the care their students will or will need to receive? This is tricky because some of our students have significant impacts and they may have a huge team of support. I think it is being affirming, being empathetic, and being understanding, and not using acronyms like we had talked about in the Jamboard, and clearly explaining things, and also asking them, hey, do you have any questions? Making sure that if it's a question that is not your area of expertise, directing them to that right person. And then sometimes what I've done is I have kind of either handwritten or typed up like a schedule of all of the services that a child receives and just kind of like how many days a week and then during what time of the day they receive them. So that will help parents stay organized. So if a student has speech and occupational therapy and physical therapy, and if like an adaptive PE teacher comes in, it's a lot to keep track of. So, providing them a visual schedule, just like you would for a student, can be really helpful sometimes. How can communication with families who do not speak English be improved, as Google Translate is not always accurate and reliable? You are 100% correct. Google Translate is getting better, but is absolutely not perfect. I know that a lot of our teachers use the Remind app, so it's Remind. And their translation services are a little bit more clear and more accurate than Google Translate. I would also, utilize like in-person interpreters and live interpreters. If you don't have an interpreter for a particular language, see if your district contracts with an interpreting service where you can do a live call uh, with someone who might speak that language. Those different services might be those agencies might be different in California than in New Jersey. I know that one of the larger agencies we use, it's Hannah Interpreting, so HANNA, and I think they offer like 70 languages. So if there's a language, say Portuguese or Russian, that your district doesn't necessarily have an interpreter for, you may want to pass along to your site administrator. They may want to contract with the interpreting service. The district may want to contract with the interpreting service, but we need to be able to provide information in the family's home language. So there's really no getting around that. And then yes, okay. With all of that being said, with all of the advocacy that you are, being asked to do and that I'm imploring you to do as you are, just starting your education careers, you will be an employee of a school district, and so you will walk a fine line as an advocate for the student and family who must also adhere to district policies. How can we best walk the fine line, especially as young or newly hired teachers? How can we be a supportive force for families who have children with disabilities without overstepping boundaries with the school districts for which we will work? This is such a difficult question to answer. What I will say, and I wish I had received this advice when I was a new teacher in a public school district, is that you have to be subversive in some ways, in your advocacy while you are still not tenured. And once you have that level of tenure, you have the protections of due process. I think once you have tenure, of course, like you still need to work with folks, but it does give you a little bit more agency to advocate and be a little bit more vocal, to be involved in your teachers union. I worked with a second year teacher about 10 years ago who thought that taking on the role of site union rep as a second year was a good idea. They were not asked to return and did not receive tenure. So I would say that you need to be very strategic about looking out for yourself in your own job so that you can continue as a tenured teacher and then advocate for your students. You don't want to put your employment in jeopardy. But knowing that sometimes we need to advocate for families who may not have the navigational capital, finding allies at your school site who are tenured, who are like-minded, who can speak on your behalf and on the student's behalf. And hopefully your site administrator is also equity minded and social justice minded, and knowing what is at your comfort level and not stepping beyond that until you have those protections. And it's not disingenuous. It's not not meeting what your families need. It's self-sustaining and self-preservation. And if you're not there to continue to advocate, like you're protecting yourself so that you can then continue to advocate with a louder voice once you have those protections. Yeah, and that it's tricky. It's really tricky. And just again from like my own like personal experience, I sometimes have a big mouth and found myself in a situation where I said something that did not resonate with a site administrator and was not asked to return. But then I found a place where I thrived and I was able to advocate for my students in a way that I felt most comfortable. And, I am where I am today because of experiences, both positive and negative. So what I will do is, here's a QR code, which if you scan this, leads to my link tree, and it'll also be available in the resource folder, so it has a variety of links. It has links to a couple of different documents that you can utilize. It has, I think, some links to some articles that I've published. It also has links to purchase the book. That's absolutely not, an obligation. If anything, ask your school library to purchase it so that you can take it out. I'm a big proponent of libraries. And yeah, feel free to reach out and connect with me if you have any other questions. But I am, I'm free for another like 10 minutes or so if you had some burning questions that you wanted to have answered. And I know it covered a lot of content in a very short period of time.
Anybody have any questions or Corinne?
Your first year when you taught, what do you think was the best way for you to communicate with your parents that made it like the easiest for you?
Yeah. So the first year that I taught, again, I'm aging myself, was before most people had smartphones. So we didn't have like video chat or anything. I asked my parents what worked best for them, if phone calls or emails worked best. As a policy, I don't give out my personal contact information to my families. I think it's an important boundary to uphold. Um, Google Voice has like a free number if you want to give that out to families. But I would ask them what worked best, and most of my families preferred phone calls rather than emails, just because before smartphones we didn't have access to email all the time. Um, since then, I've continued to ask that question. And even the families that I work with, when we are, going through discussions about disagreements in an IEP, I'll ask them, I'm like, does phone work best for you? Does email work best? Would you rather, jump on a Zoom or a Google Meet? And just kind of take it from there. Just kind of let them answer that for you. So just being flexible. And also being really clear about expectations for when you will read and respond to emails or respond to phone calls. I think like 1 to 2 business days is realistic. And even if it's a question that you cannot answer, a phone call or an email saying, hey, I've received your phone call or email. This is not a question that I can answer. I need to do some more research and ask folks, but I will get back to you. So just recognizing and acknowledging receipt of it rather than just letting it kind of linger there, lets parents know that you're looking into that answer, because we don't know everything. I get questions sometimes where I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, so I need to ask somebody else.
Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Vogel Campbell. This was great, very informative. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I guess. Well, do you maybe you have a minute to stay on the line with me, and I can wish everybody a nice evening. Enjoy your evening. We'll end a little early today, and I will see you next week. The course schedule is updated. I can't remember what's due next week. The family project, I think, and maybe one reading too. I can't be sure offhand, but the course schedule is up to date.
Yeah.
Reach out if you have any questions for me. Otherwise, have a good night. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. It was great. It was great meeting you, and best of luck, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, I have a quick question for you. Next
Yes.
week, I